are correct. And usually I get to have the video on, but not today. So don't worry about that. But definitely get familiar with that chat button, because we really do want to hear from you.
Somebody. Florida, gosh, I wish I was in Florida at the moment. Lovely and warm, as opposed to it's a little chilly in Boston today, everybody. Dublin, which is awesome. Hello from Zurich and Sweden. It's an international crew. It's nice to be part of planet Earth and reminded that we are, hey?
Yeah, I love it. I love how international this is getting, and we're going to have some really awesome perspectives and different questions from all around. Alrighty, folks. So we are right at the top of the hour. So I am going to get us kicked off here. Again, you all know how the chat feature works. So feel free to pop your questions in there, your comments, and learn from each other, as we're also learning from Dave. If you have a particular question that you would like me to flag for him, pop it into the Q&A to make sure that we keep track of what has been asked. Dave, if you just want to pop me to the next slide, that would be fantastic. Okay. So we are here today. Of course, you all know we are going to have an awesome conversation about the tension and the opportunity of product ownership from a product manager's perspective and point of view. So Dave is going to talk to us and share really how product owner is a role, not a job title. I know, really hot topic, and he'll tell you all about that, how product management work flows throughout the entire team, and then of course, what we all need every time is how to measure your success really along the way. And Dave is, of course, the product owner and CEO at Scrum.org. So as one of the foremost industry experts, don't blush, Dave, it's true, around software development and deployment, he has helped, tons of modern software orgs develop processes, including the unified process and agile methods. So he's a frequent keynote. He speaks at major industry conferences. He's also the co-author of 2 books, The Nexus Framework for Scaling Scrum and Headfirst Object-Oriented Analysis and Design. Big title there, Dave. So of course, I'm delighted that we got to steal some of his time to chat with us here today. And we're, really excited to begin the discussion. If you pop to the next slide for me, Dave, very quickly, my name is Georgina Donahue, and I run the Pragmatic Alumni community. And so what we do there is we're really focused on making sure that everything that you learned in your pragmatic training, we're going to make sure that you know exactly how to implement it, and we're going to connect you with someone that has done that before. So you can really just keep that lifelong learning journey happen. And one of the very best things that I get to do in my job is speak to people like Dave and kind of put on events for you like that here. So without further ado, the star of our show, I'm delighted to hand it over to Dave. And Dave, take it away and tell us a little more about yourself.
Thanks, Georgina. So I'm Dave West here, based just outside Boston. Actually, I was talking about this earlier on another event. This office that I'm in is one of the offices where the second ever Scrum project ever happened. I tried to put a plaque on the wall, but the building landlord saw me with a screwdriver and a drill, and they told me I wasn't allowed to do that, unfortunately. But one day I'm going to get this plaque on the wall here in Burlington, Massachusetts, where the second ever Scrum project happened. Scrum.org, founded by Ken Schwaber. You know who we are. We do professional Scrum Master, the training, the certification, body of knowledge. A little bit over 1 million people come to our site every month to talk about Scrum, to find stuff out, to talk about Agile, to sort of debate the challenges of the world that we live in. There's some contact details. Feel free to reach out. Hopefully hopefully we can carry on this conversation, because product ownership, product management, I'm going to call it product leadership, is really, really hard. I know. My product is Scrum, obviously at scrum.org, and my stakeholder is Ken Schwaber. Can you imagine how hard that is as a product owner? This is what we're going to do, Ken. No, we're not. Oh, anyway, so it's been a really interesting experience doing that. So before we start, I really do want to set the scene and provide some context for today's presentation. 2020, eh? So if you were in my, well, if the camera was slightly differently placed, you would see my plans for 2020. It was on this wall over here and that wall over here. I had this great roadmap, right? Everything that we're doing and all this work. Yeah. And then March the 13th came along, and that was the end of that, hey? The world is very, very challenging. I'm a big fan of a lady called Khalida Perez. She's an economist at London School of Economics, and she talks about the technology revolutions or ages, where she believes we're in the fifth age, some say we're in the fourth age. But the reason why I bring this slide up is because it needs to set some context. I believe that 2020 will be the tipping point to move from the industrial age, the oil and mass production age, to what you could probably call the digital age or the digital and software age. I really do believe that we're at that tipping point. And this has happened many times, well, 5 times before, 4 times before. So this has happened before, that fundamentally everything is going to be different from now on. If it hasn't been different for the last 9 months, it's going to continue to be different. And, this is the sort of example of these 5 ages that we're entering. And you can see that, and you can read this stuff from Khalida's blog. But the reason why I bring that up, and the reason why I sort of set this context, isn't because I like to talk about economics, or even able. In fact, at university, it was was very, very boring and dull. But the reason why I bring it up is because fundamentally the role of the product leader, product manager, product owner is increasingly going to be more important. And the interesting piece of data that reinforces this. So we're fortunate enough to work with McKinsey here at Scrum.org, and they did some research on how organizations were managing in this COVID crisis, et cetera. And they found a really interesting piece of data that I'm going to share with you. What they found was that they have this L7, 7 levels of management or people in an organization, on a large organization. And sometimes there's not quite 7, sometimes there's more, but generally. And so what they do is they surveyed the communication between each level, and they found that because of the impact of COVID, and because of the working from home, because of the not understanding the market, all of these really interesting things, what they found was that organizations at the top level, level 7 and level 1, 2, were collaborating over 100% more than they were prior to it. Ultimately, what we saw was that decision making was being pushed down, not be for any reason. They weren't doing bureaucracy or some trendy sort of new management technique. They were having to respond rapidly to the environment they were in. The decisions about what the features the products were, what capabilities they were going to deliver to market, what value that they were going to pursue, the decisions were being made by people that were working very closely with the customer, people that were working in product teams, people that were working actually in those software or product teams or whatever the thing you were building. And this is really, I believe that we're at a tipping point where we're moving from a project orientation, which was really we talked about building bridges and tunnels and everything in the age of mass production and oil. We're very into that, right? And that was sort of that defined us, the Channel Tunnel. That's a great example of a huge project. And I'm not saying projects are going away, but ultimately organizations will instead orient themselves around the customer and the value, the contained value that we deliver to that customer in what we would call a product, or a service, right? So that means that product management, product leadership ultimately has gone from sort of like this sort of, hey, you're on the corner, you're building your products, but you've got this project and then the PMO is involved. And it's all this sort of messy, complicated relationship between you and them, and you're just telling the teams what the customer wants, and somebody else is telling you when and the schedule and all this. It's moving away from that to something where we're aligning better to that customer. And obviously that means cross-functional teams that can serve that customer in the both ways. That means that self-organization and decentralization has to happen as we respond to change faster. And yes, it means the idea of even the reason why I say leader as well is, you know, that was the manager word is very much attributed to that previous age. Leadership, creation, value, you know, customer, delivering value to the customer is what it is, the rise of the creator, right? And I'm super excited about this time, because I think that there's so much potential in the world that was being undermined by our sort of industrial mindset, you know, to get funding to decide what we're going to do. It used to go up and up and then down and down, and then nobody would make a decision. So you'd end up doing something that was a bit of everything, which would be a bit of nothing. And, you know, I'm excited that we're going to do some amazing things because of this shift to a different way of thinking. Product thinking, product leadership, dare I say management, takes center stage. Ownership takes center stage. Basically, we're going to align teams and organizations to customers and outcomes. There'll be smaller teams, honestly, more focused on delivering value. You know, maybe they're smaller because you can only get so many people on your Zoom call. I don't know. Maybe they're smaller because, you know, you haven't got the economics to make a big team. Maybe it's smaller because you can only find a certain small group of people that have got the skills necessary to do the thing that you want. And that means that you know, ultimately that those teams and that product owner, that product leader, that product manager need ownership and vision. It means they need to own the value that this product, these set of services or capabilities is going to deliver to the customer, which is, you know, great. Now, but the reality is, you know, and this is obviously, if you're going to talk about reality, we have to do Dilbert, which is interesting, isn't it? That we use that to sort of as a sort of analogy to reality. You know, that we end up in this environment where, yes, we're going to go product oriented. We're going to align to customer outcomes and value streams. We're going to empower teams to make decisions. But let's be frank, I don't really want to change my position of power, and you have to do everything's a must-have. And, you know, the fact is you haven't got the people in your team necessary to deliver value you want. And no, you can't get the insights about the customer because I own the customer. I'm a salesperson or I'm a marketing channel or whatever. So you can't talk to the customer. No. And the reality isn't quite there yet. And there's definitely some challenges. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go through this. And the other thing that's really interesting is this sort of need for a single person making decisions. And, you know, the product owner, there's been a lot of debate and a very worthy debate. I respect the conversations that we're having about the product owner. Is it a single human being? And why should it be in this new world? And why can't it be a committee? Why can't it be the whole team making a decision? And why can't everybody come together and the like? And maybe it can in your situation. But let me just share a little bit about the context, the reason why Ken Schwaber changed the title of the Agile Product Manager, which was what it was in the original piece written 25 years ago. Last October was the anniversary of Scrum, 25-year anniversary. The reason why he changed that was really he believed clearly that that needs to be a single person that makes those decisions. Compromise was getting in the way, and he was working on something called the FBI Sentinel program. Compromise was undermining their ability to actually deliver anything. They were trying to satisfy so many people at any one moment. This particular government program couldn't actually deliver anything. So the first thing that he said was, yeah, I respect that all these things are valuable, but and he acted in this position initially, I'm going to decide based on all the things I've heard what the first 10 things are, 12 things, first thing is. And because of that, they delivered that. and they proved they could deliver. And then that gave them insights into the next 10 things. And ultimately that led to this decision-making process streamlined. Now, it really, you could argue that, oh, well, that it's a very political role, and often it is, but ultimately somebody's got to make that decision. Somebody is the CEO of that product, is the entrepreneur of that product, making the decisions that deliver the most value to the business. And those decisions are very visible because they deliver value, right? They're very visible because they are inspectable at every sprint review in the case of Scrum, but every release, which could be more frequent than the sprint review. Those decisions are obvious to everybody involved, but it is an interesting challenge. Now, some of you may have noticed in November, we launched a new Scrum Guide. We updated the Scrum Guide. When I say we, I mean the community as a whole. The Scrum Guide, though, is managed. In fact, the product owner is Ken Schwaber for the Scrum Guide, working with Jeff Sutherland. They own it, as it were. But there was a lot of changes to the Scrum Guide in general to make it more usable, to broaden its applicability outside the domain of software as it was being used in many of those different places. But the other thing that came up that was really interesting is this one team focused on one product. This real focus that Scrum isn't about doing work. Yes, you have to do work to make Scrum work. That obviously, I mean, you can't do empiricism by just sitting around thinking very hard. Or maybe you can, but I'm not sure what you're doing empiricism on. Maybe just thinking, then that would be it. Which, anyway, but the point is you do have to deliver. But a lot of people use Scrum and the ideas of it really as this backlog is work. The product owner is really the project manager, and the Scrum Master sort of, well, I don't know quite what they do. They just make everybody have meetings and use facilitation techniques. But it's all about the work, and it's like that. Really, what Scrum is, it is all about the work, but it's all about the work in pursuit of value. The idea of a product in Scrum is a vehicle to deliver value. It's a clear boundary, so we know what is in it and what isn't in it. It has known stakeholders, or in my case, often unknown stakeholders that make themselves very known very quickly when we start doing stuff on it. Well-defined users or customers, so it has a customer, somebody that gets value from it. It could be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract, but ultimately, we are focusing now on delivering the value to customers, not the work necessary to do it. Now, to do that, there was a few changes. Not only was the Scrum team now responsible for the increment, so the incremental change to the product, but also the introduction of a product goal. Now, the product goal is really groovy. Oh my gosh, I sound like I'm an old person there. It's really cool because what it does is it provides us with that context for the work. So I used to travel the world with my little Scrum bag and talk to lots of organizations. And I remember I was in Brazil, and I'm not sure if anybody's from Brazil online today, but I was in São Paulo, which is a fantastic place, by the way, just for the record. The food in Brazil, rocking, awesome. And I was in São Paulo and I visited all these great companies, and they were doing amazing things. And they had these velocity charts and burn down charts and everything on the board. And that was very cool. But there was something missing, and I sort of felt it on my first visit, but I didn't say anything. I was like, well, that's good. And how you doing? And how's self-organizing or self-managing happening? And, tell me some of your challenges. And we chatted. And the next visit, though, I realized what it was. It was nobody was talking about the customer. Nobody was talking about the gap. Nobody was talking about the purpose. They were talking about the work. They were talking about how they were working. They were introducing me some fabulous things around that, but there was nobody talking about. And so product goal really is the instantiation or the artifact that sort of encourages us. So it's not obviously enough. You'll need to use personas. You'll need to do, maybe you have semantic maps. Maybe you'll have, whatever techniques you want. Maybe there's some D-school stuff that you want to roll in. But having that product goal front and center really helps us think about why we're there. And the reason why that's super empowering is because if you're a self-managed team and you're managing how you work and what you do, and the product owner is part of that, ultimately, ideally, you can change what you do in pursuit of the product goal and the sprint goal in the context of the sprint, rather than do something that you don't need to do. So you can continuously, when you realize something's too big, maybe you say, well, we can't do this, but we can do that. It gives you that power. It encourages the stakeholders and you as a team, as Scrum team and the product owner driving this to have that conversation, to make that thing transparent. And I wonder how many times when you get these teams together and you say, okay, so why are we doing this again? And you ask them all separately in a small dark room with one light aiming at them. And you say, why are we doing this? I wonder how many of them have got a consistent idea of the goal. So that was added. Brilliant. Shippable was removed and valuable was added. So the focus isn't on shipping stuff. You do need to ship stuff. And ideally you ship if you're doing a software environment, but in any environment, you ship frequently for a sprint and review your findings of the increment, all the stuff you shipped in the sprint review. But ultimately what you do is you're shipping valuable stuff. You're delivering value, not stuff. It's not about motion, it's about outcomes. And as a product leader, as a product manager, this is kind of empowering. And it's probably all the stuff you're doing already, and there's some amazing members of your community that I'm sure are doing this already. But it's empowering to sort of take a step back from the, oh, we're doing this screen or this marketing plan or this whatever, and say, why are we doing it? How do we get consensus on that? What's the smallest thing we can do that delivers the most value up front? Which is cool. The other thing is that we added a definition of what product was, which is really good. And so that the changes to the Scrum Guide in November, I think, have really provided a foundation for us to talk more openly about what it really means to lead a product, to talk more openly about value, to bring in some of the other complementary practices around value, which I'll be talking about in a moment.
Hey, Dave, before we move on, we do have a couple questions for you. Are you ready?
Oh, George, it was excellent. I was actually going to, after this one, but yes, Georgina, yes. Georgina's from Boston, so she's, she tells me what to do, which is great.
It's what we have to do, I suppose. How about this? I'll make you a deal. We've got two easy ones and then one that's a little bit more in depth. We'll do that one after, and we'll do the easy ones now.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
So the first one is, what do you consider to be a big team versus a small team?
So actually, that's really, really interesting. A team honestly needs to be somewhere in the sort of 10 to 12. That's the biggest you can go. Now, the reality is that you'll probably, in most product organizations, you tend to scale up, right? There's multiple teams. So they're working as separate teams, but in an overall, we would call it a nexus. You may call it a tribe. I don't care what container you call it. So teams should not go over sort of like 12 people, ideally, because we all know why, because the communications, you could see it today on Zoom. When you have page 2 on the thing on your Zoom, that's probably too big a team. Now, that does not mean that you don't need all these people somehow. So you have to think about, how do we decompose our product into chunks that make sense, that have value onto themselves, that then a team can take ownership of. And then you have one product owner for multiple teams, or one product leader for multiple teams, all working towards that product. And you orient in some way those teams. Now, a small team, I think anything more than 2 people is a small team. Hopefully that answered the question.
I think it did. That's brilliant. And then we also have one that is just a clarifying question to make sure people are following along. Someone is asking about, 2 actually want to know about a product goal versus a product vision. And can you give an example, just a clarifying example of a product goal?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Thanks for asking that. So some of it's semantics, honestly. I think of a product goal as something broader that really defines the outcomes that we seek. And a vision could actually be the context for that goal or how we realize that goal, because it depends on your organization. But ultimately, I see a goal as something that's quite tangible, has a defined set of outcomes, has a clear customer, has some sort of bound so you can measure it, as it were. And then the vision may provide that context for that goal, or it may describe how you've taken that goal and your vision for implementing it. So it depends on how you're using the term product vision. And I see, obviously the Rational Unified Process, which I was the product manager of, we had a vision that was more the latter than the former, meaning it was more about how you realize a goal, and was more probably akin to a roadmap. But different organizations do it both ways. The thing that's important is, and I think you'll probably need to have both and decide, you need to have some context for a goal usually, and you'll need to show how that goal is realized. And sometimes it's sufficient to have a backlog and those elements. Maybe it's relatively simple. Sometimes it requires more narrative to describe how you're going to, and there's a roadmap and there's some set of ideas and hypotheses that you're going to execute against. But I don't get too bogged down in the words. I learned when I was young and also didn't have hair, I learned that the difference between a terrorist and a methodologist is you can reason with a terrorist. A lot of people get very bogged down in words, and particularly in our agile community, they really, really do. So I think, depending on the situation, you need context for any goal, and that could be described in a product vision or some sort of visioning statement, and you need how you're going to realize that goal. In the simplest situation, the goal is self-apparent, and then the backlog describes it. That could be the simplest situation. That's the minimal bar. In most situations, you need a combination of roadmap and you need a combination of broader product vision of context. Georgina,
Wonderful.
do you think I got that? I don't know.
I think you got it brilliantly. I think that I've bamboozled you into thinking it was a quick and easy one, but you, as normal, over-delivered. So please carry right along. We've got tons of questions in the backlog here for you when you're ready, but we will get to those in a bit.
Cool. Thank you, Georgina. And thank you, everybody. Good questions. And, there's your words, hey, they sort of, they unify us. As an Englishman living in America, I realize frequently how they can confuse us as well. So product owner, this is the definition. This is the new definition in the Scrum guide. Hey, you'll notice some clear things around communication, product goal, product backlog items, ordering things. Basically, if you're going to give it one word or one sort of in a nutshell, it's maximizing value. It's making sure they're empowered to make decisions about the product. They really are the people that decide the order of what's being delivered, really. And the what changes depending on the circumstances, obviously. And that's the reason why I don't like the word manager for product manager. Now, and by the way, I'm not insulting you everybody that's got that as a title. Cool, that's different. That's in your context. But I really like to emphasize leader or owner, because the manager just says that other people are making decisions and you're managing the implementation of it. I actually want, ideally, the product person to be empowered to make the decisions about the product, which is incredibly powerful for lots of reasons. The most important reason in this new age, in this post-industrial age, is the frequency of change. The reality is, if you had to go up 7 levels of leadership to get that decision made, you're going to slow down our ability to respond to the market. So that's super important. The other thing is, what you do and how you cut the suit to suit the cloth in response to the situation that you're learning about varies deeply, and you having that power to make those decisions is incredibly valuable. Now, it's a daunting task. I speak from personal experience. Last year, we had a product that I was championing. I actually gave it to somebody else to product own, but I was still we didn't drink our own champagne. We were kind of both kind of product owning it, which was a disaster. And ultimately we failed because, for lots of reasons, the product didn't end up delivering on the value that we wanted. And it was very blatantly clear. In fact, we broke two cardinal rules, two product owners, but also we broke the ability to incrementally do the smallest thing and get everybody to observe it. We kept our heads down, hid, and we worked on it for 6-9 months, and then came up and they were like, whoa, that's not what we want. So we broke two rules that were really, really detrimental to that product's future. We learned a lot though. So it's always a thumbs up for learning, hey? That was a very emotionally exhausting time. So it's a hard job, but a simple one at some levels. You know, conceptually, it's really easy. But these are the sorts of questions that I really want to talk about today in detail. You know, it sounds simple, but what does it, doesn't this mean I have too much work? And if so, what should I focus on? How can I be measured in terms of my success? And then how do I go? Who do I go to for support? You know, obviously we've got a great community here, so I'd recommend that first. But, you know, where's my aspirational, you know, what do I become? Where do I go? Is product owner it? Or product leader it? Or product manager it? Or is it senior product manager? Or is it, you know, how does that work? And so which is super interesting. Hopefully, I don't think I can necessarily address all of this and answer every question here, but I'm going to have a go. So let's start with too much work. So we talked about vision, competitors, customers, partners, channel, roadmap, outcomes, ecosystem, return on investment, plan, future, budget. Gosh, what else have we got? Stakeholders, managing stakeholders. Oh my God, you can, yes, as you can imagine in my role, managing stakeholders takes up a significant amount of time. Personas, you know, let's keep the plan up to date. How do we make it transparent? These are just some of the things that a good product leader is focused on, right? That's a lot to do. To do any of these things well is a full-time job. And then people start saying, well, we need a team to do this. And we need, you know, yes, actually, we do need a team. But I would argue you have them. Those teams are the teams that are delivering value, whether they're Scrum teams, whether they're whatever, I don't care what you call them, whether they're squads, whether they're, what's the other new thing I heard, whether they're units, I'm not totally sure I like that one. You know, whatever you call them, I don't really care. But ultimately, you have a bunch of people that are there, that it's in their interests to help you build a fantastic vision or create personas or spend some time with competitors and you know why it's in their interests? To build the thing, to deliver the value, to help their customers. If it's not now, you know, it's not against what they need to do. You might say, well, they've got other things to do, the actual building. Yes. So we're going to have to make some tough decisions. Sometimes it means early sprints. We're not going to do as much product, you know, development, as it were, the end stuff. And we're going to do more experimentation and understanding. Maybe we're going to spend time doing competitive analysis. Maybe we're going to, now we can't spend too much time because every time you have a sprint review and invite those stakeholders, they go, was this all you've been doing? So we've got balance. We have to balance these things. And the product owner is part of these teams now. The new Scrum guide makes that very apparent. They're not the team's boss just because they have a series of additional accountabilities around value and decision making around the backlog. They're nobody's boss. So that's kind of interesting. Requirements, you know, it's a massive undertaking, and you know, most systems, do we still need to do that? Of course we do. We have to work out what the customer wants, you know, and the product owner is ultimately responsible for the value delivered, therefore they have a relationship with this, but the whole team is responsible. Now, in some situations, the product owner might be the best person to do it. Now, I would argue that it's not very agile if one person is the only person involved in things. And it's much better to have, maybe you do some pairing, or maybe you do something that brings the team together and focuses on that, you know, making things transparent, you know. But the question is, if you don't get the team involved in requirements, what happens on sprint 1? Well, you have to have a lot of work done outside of this team thing. That's what people say, right? Sprint 0, which isn't actually, or you have this 2-phase overlapping model where you're always just slightly ahead. Now, I'm not questioning whether it's a sprint 0 or whether overlapping works. What I'm questioning is, wouldn't it be better to sort of make this a team activity, get everybody or get the appropriate people focused on that? And yes, maybe some people are doing a spike, maybe some people are doing some other things at the same time, but ultimately, you've still got to deliver the things, and it's ideal if you get more involvement from the team. And the relationship, unfortunately, like I know some people's Facebook relationship status is it is complicated. In some situations, product owners and product managers do the requirements. In some situations, they don't. Some situations, they define a vision and then everybody works in it together. In some situations, there's a couple of business analysts that work in the team that do that, but they also do some testing, and maybe they get involved in some stakeholder management. You know, depending on your situation will vary. The real thing I'm super excited about by this change from this industrial paradigm to this digital or different way of working, this product-oriented paradigm, is empowerment. Now, I'm hoping that the team isn't constrained by the job title or my 50 years of experience doing this, but we treat that as an opportunity and we look at the needs first, and then we work out how we can work on this. And I was going to tell you a story about a COVID lab, but I'm not going to do that because I haven't really got time. I just looked at the time. So, all right. So you can't do everything. There's a lot of things to do. The best way of dealing with that is to make things transparent and work with the teams to help you. You're not their parent. You don't have to hide it and look embarrassed. And I know the best refinement meetings happen when everybody's prepared, but sometimes it's not possible to do that. So that means the team has to help. And that might mean the refinement session doesn't go very well, but you learn from that. And that might change what you were going to deliver in that sprint or you were going to work on, and you'll learn from that. The great thing about inspection and adaptation is it gives you that opportunity, that life cycle of Scrum gives you that opportunity to improve and gives you the ability to work together. Now, focus. Focus is interesting. What should I therefore focus on? You know, is it managing stakeholders and customers? Is it, you know, playing politics in the organization and making sure that we've got the right funding and we've got the right interference to actually have the time to do the work that we need? Is it to spend all my time with my Scrum teams or my teams, ensuring that they are having all the questions answered and making sure that they're happy? And the answer is yes. It's all of those things, and every situation is slightly different. But if I had to do one thing, that's universal, it's building that vision. And I know I use the word vision there, making sure that those goals are clearly articulated in context, making sure that everybody is going in the same direction. When I say everybody, I mean the stakeholders, those people that are, you know, writing checks, and those people that are giving you space so you can work, and those people that are getting ready to launch whatever you're doing, those getting everybody on that on board. So I spend a lot of time in my role here at scrum.org pottering around, and I describe it like that, talking to people about why we're doing stuff. I take time out of my busy schedule to some would say overhead, other would say busy, I don't know, my schedule, and talk to people about why we're doing it for two reasons. One, every time I describe the vision of scrum.org and the products that we're building and why it's so important, somebody asks the question, and that question may lead to some improved understanding for me and for that person. That's why building the vision is, and I make it personal. I tell stories that provide empathy. Make sure it's clear, that it has guardrails so the decisions can be made within it. And sometimes it's not clear, and that's painfully obvious at sprint reviews when I'm like, well, that wasn't really what I meant. And they're like, well, that's what it says. And I'm like, oh, you say tomato, I say tomato. Oh, yeah, I can see. Oh, that's interesting. And that helps. It's measurable. So there's some metrics associated with it that we can clearly see some outcome that we're achieving. Sometimes those measures are super hard. And it makes sense. So it's linked to in the case of scrum.org, our product visions are linked to our mission, which is helping people and teams solve complex problems. So as long as it links to that, how does it help that? And that's where measurement often comes in as well. So should you do all the other things? Yeah, probably, maybe. Every situation is slightly different. When you're feeling overwhelmed, ask the teams for help. Step back, go, hey, these are all the things I could do. Can somebody, what should we do? And then have that conversation, be vulnerable, have that courage. The other thing that's really interesting is, is experimentation. Ultimately, when you've got that vision, many of the things that you're going to deliver are experiments, are hypotheses that you think. So you break things down to the smallest chunk of value that you can deliver that demonstrates movement towards that product goal. Because you have this magic product box. We got the business model, the channel, the architecture, the user experience, the customer, the features. And yes, in some situations, maybe you're inside IT and you're inside this big organization. You have less of these that you can twiggle. But you'll be surprised how powerful the things that you do can be when you find the right allies to do it. The other thing that's interesting is anything you do has to be desirable, feasible, viable, but probably something that's most important is culturally appropriate. Some situation, at scrum.org, we have a very strong moral compass about certain things that we do. We have the values, we have certain things that have tripped us up in the past. And that means certain things we just don't do because they're not right for us. They might be right for other people. So you have that ability to experiment with these things, and it's kind of cool, which means that you have to bring in some complementary practices. So that means if you want to build a compelling vision and you want to then build experiments to execute against that vision, that means working with your teams to help you. You need to start thinking about 2 other complementary collections of practices: the D-School work, design thinking, and lean startup. And obviously Scrum sort of brings that. So basically you bring in this empirical approach to delivering value and actually refining that vision and your goals around it, which means that you have to plan, sense, and respond continuously. Now, sometimes that's in the construct of a sprint. Maybe it's a few sprints. Maybe there's some sort of release pipeline kind of release train kind of thing if you're using SAFe or something like that. Maybe it's something else. But ultimately, you as product leaders need to take on board design thinking and lean startup, one, to better contextualize the customer, and secondly, to then think about the business or the canvas, the business model that we're going to use against that customer's need. Maybe it's some sort of partnership, maybe it's new software, maybe it's a letter, I don't know, whatever those things are. Now, before I move to measures though, let's Georgina, are you still there? Have you gone to sleep? You've probably gone to sleep, haven't you?
I have not gone to sleep. No, I have not.
Dull at times. Is there any other questions from the audience that we might like to address?
I think the fact that there are over 20 questions from the audience testifies that you certainly are not boring and no one has gone to sleep. There's a little bit of clarification about, there's 2 questions that are somewhat similar, so I'll double tap with that one. The first is, can the Scrum Master also be the product owner? And if not, why? And then the second question is more about hierarchy, but related. In the hierarchy of product VP, product director, product manager, product owner, how do you define the true product ownership? And how do those all play nice in the sandbox?
Yeah, let's start with the hierarchy question. Hierarchy's dead, man. We're going to be all flat. It's going to be bureaucracy everywhere. It's going to be like, we're going to be eating granola and stuff. Seriously, though, that's not the case, is it? Unfortunately, hierarchies have still got a ways to go. I would argue that hierarchies are an element of the previous sort of industrial age, based around the idea of Ford and Taylor and the like. However, the reality is that we still considered to have them. So where does it fit? Now, what I've noticed, and I don't know if you've observed this as well, but what I've noticed is that product ownership ultimately isn't necessarily connected to the hierarchy. So you'd think that, you know, basically the head honcho that's responsible for a product would be the product owner. That could be VP of product, it could be whatever, it could be director, depends. Now the reality is that that person may be ultimately, you know, in the positional authority responsible for product. But really, the person that's really making all the decisions on a day-to-day basis is this one geezer over here, right? So product owner sometimes can actually be just somebody that has the authority in the organization because of their experience, their history, their relationship with the client, etc. Now, what I see though is that then the product owner, well, that has to report to somebody that ultimately brings together for an organization all those products to deliver value to the customer. Now, in a large organization, that might be some sort of value stream kind of leader of some description. In a smaller organization, that might actually be the CEO. It really depends. Most software companies, product ideally should never report to engineering and should always report to some sort of more commercial oriented, customer oriented thing. Ideally, product leadership, management, owners should report into somebody that's connected to customers, that's connected to outcomes, that's connected to that. When they report into the organization that's managed as in terms of as a cost, you know, whether it's engineering or IT and an expense, then suddenly their whole frame changes. So I think that's super important. Okay, now hopefully that sort of didn't answer your question because it's really hard to answer depending on your situation. However, I think some of the warning signs are when product reports into the engineering operations CFO. Oh, that's awful. COO, well, it depends on the business, but might be a bit questionable. It's best if they report into the business in some way. Now, second question was about PMSM. Can they be the same thing? I can't say that they can't. However, when you think about the roles, accountabilities, we dropped the word role in the Scrum Guide this release, but sometimes it's hard to change man's words, right? When we look at those accountabilities, the product owner is accountable for value. They're incredibly busy, focused on that. It's already a job that's bigger than any one human being can do. They have to involve the team. The Scrum Master is responsible for ensuring basically transparency, empiricism, the flow, these sort of agile principles happen because they believe ultimately that if those things happen, then more value will be delivered. So they're sort of like a value enabler, value decider, you know. Now, can that be one person? I think it's hard. I don't think it's impossible, but from my experience, it's hard. There was a large financial institution that when COVID hit, they decided to cut costs. So they laid off all their Scrum Masters and said, you product owners are responsible for Scrum Mastery as well. And then what happened? Well, the product owner started to become a project manager and start telling people what to do. Not because they didn't care about Scrum, they did. But the reality is they just were damn busy and they were like, oh, yeah, we could discuss it and get better at it, but let's just do it. Do that. And they ended up failing. They've now gone back. They brought in Scrum Masters again. And because they've realized that actually it's good to have that separations of concern. So that's my take on those two questions, Georgina. Now let's talk about measures, shall we? We've got about 11 minutes left. Measures. Tricky, eh? Simpler in a smaller company focused on a customer product and customer product development, much easier in those contexts because ultimately the measure is, Are we making payroll? Are we making money? Are we doing okay? What's our stock price? Whatever those things are. In smaller companies, it is much easier. In larger companies, there's lots of layers of products and services, a sort of disconnection of realities and fiefdoms and kingdoms. And however, I am seeing that change. I'm seeing organizations, pull out their value streams and align their teams, and they call them tribes mostly now. They're squads and tribes, right? Their tribes and squads into these value streams with clear product ownership, accountability, and so it's starting to change. And then they become more like the smaller companies, or lots of smaller companies all working together. But without measures, it's really hard to be empirical, right? So we tend to talk about this thing called EBM. Now, I don't know whether this isn't a methodology. You're not going to get a t-shirt. Yes, we do have a test. You can pass the cert if you want, but that's not, maybe we should have t-shirts, but I'm not pushing this in that way. What I'm finding though, is the questions that you need to ask of your metrics tend to fall into 4 buckets. And I'm going to start really on the top right, current value. Every product by its very nature should have value that is measurable to the customer. Now, in most situations, that's financial, but it might not be. It could be something about usage. It could be something about availability. It could be whatever. But there's some current value that's measurable that will change over time as you incrementally, through things like Scrum, deliver value against it. The other thing is on the market side is this unrealized value. Now, that value isn't as much as we could get, either because not enough people are using it, or not enough people are spending money on it, or not enough people are, taking it and infecting others with it. If you use COVID for this, this current value is very high, and it unfortunately is still a considerable unrealized value if you were the COVID virus and you're running it as a product, which is a really bad analogy, and I'm moving swiftly on. Anyway, so you've got these 2 things. So there's some metrics around that. What is the opportunity? How much of that opportunity are we realizing? Then there's this ability, organizational capability, or team capability, or Scrum team capability. But really it's 2 things: time to market. The organizations that are most successful around this sort of paradigm of product thinking, and who they are: Amazon, Tesla, these sort of companies do it because they have a time to, they can basically, their mean time to resolution, their idea to cash, their whatever is short. They have the ability to rapidly deliver value. Now, some of those organizations that are delivering very rapidly, increasingly though, aren't doing a good job because the amount of stuff they're doing frequently isn't really innovative. It's in fact the exact opposite. It's just fixing stuff. It's just making sure that, privacy or somebody's, those sort of things. Dealing with, getting rid of, changing our terms and conditions, all that. So the ability to innovate, how much of that is value work as opposed to just keeping the lights on work? So these 4 buckets, we call it EBM, evidence-based management, is a really good way of framing the questions around the dashboards or metrics that you and your product organization needs to really be measured. You'll notice there's no motion metrics. And you can argue that time to market is a motion metric, but I'm not going to do it. Meaning velocity. I don't care of your velocity. I don't care how many story points you deliver. I don't care what your slot ratio is. What I care is how much value you're delivering. The only velocity that makes any difference is the customer value velocity, which is really the embodiment of ability to innovate and time to market. Oh, hang on, measures shouldn't be up there. Ignore that thing on the top right. So what am I called then? Now, first things first is product owner is just a set of accountabilities, not a job title or role. You can be a product owner as a job title, but then you're adding things to it. Probably a lot of the stuff that Pragmatic does, that fan that they have, you're adding up those capabilities and you're doing this and you're responsible for this, etc. And the subset of those will be the product owner accountabilities of Scrum. Every situation is different, unfortunately, but I can tell you what skills a good product leader has. They have the discipline of product management. Pragmatic, there's some amazing stuff there. In fact, I learned to be a product manager with Pragmatic because IBM was a big customer. Yeah, so and they're still getting over me as a learner. So product management, customers, design thinking, lean UX, great stuff we can do there. The idea of personas, the idea of opportunity gaps, the semantic models and the like. Business models, lean startup, great stuff that we need to think about is how do we take these, what is our business model? And even in an internal system that's being used by IT, think about really where your functionality should lie, when should it lie with the users, how does it fit in their value stream, where does it, etc. And then how to work Scrum and Agile. Those four things, those four buckets are necessary to be a great product leader. That's what I think. That's what I believe. Now, you could argue, oh, well, is there other things? And there's probably lots of other things. But ultimately, if you tick boxes in all of those things, if you're called a product manager, a product leader, a VP of whatever's, doesn't really matter. If you've got those skills in your definition of the role that you do, then I think you're in a very, very good position. Now, I know, gosh, we're sort of final words, and I want one or two more questions. So product owner is responsible. So ultimately, the reason why we need a product owner is because of empiricism, because of this rapid changing environment they're in. The fact that we need to have somebody making rapid decisions in response to the environment and having our teams go in that direction defined by True North. It's not an agile requirements manager. It's not a project manager. It's a really hard job because you're navigating that intersection of business, technology, and people, which is the worst place to be, by the way. It will get easier, I think, and I think the reasons are twofold. I think one, our understanding of the things, the discipline is improving every day. But the second reason is because organizations are realigning their value streams and their teams and their organizational constructs to better support products. Design thinking and lean startup are becoming a standard way of thinking. Now, whether it's Stephen Blank's work or Eric Ries's work, Eric Ries has written a new book that's not very popular for some reason. I'm not totally sure why. I haven't read it yet. But anyway, so whatever those ideas are and that groups are, whether you go to D school, whether you go to the lean UX school or whatever, doesn't really matter, but you need to start thinking about that. Community is crucial. You're on one today. Take advantage of it, because I believe ultimately that this is the place that you're going to get better, this community, whether it's inside or outside an organization. And then think about measurement. Think about measurement. Stay connected. This is an interesting conversation. Maybe we have chance for one more question. And here's some stuff. Georgina, I know I'm sorry, I do go on, don't I? We've got like 3 minutes, maybe one question or two.
I think that everyone has been loving it. And I will say to your point about community, because I talk about community all day long and I can't help myself. I'm incredibly proud of this group of folks that are on here because they have taken to the chat to ask and answer questions of one another and have gotten some really great knowledge sharing going in there. So bravo to you guys and keep it up. I hope you notice people's names and maybe make a new connection from across the world. Last question for you. This is a high one, so you can choose how you want to, with what depth you want to answer. What does the ideal Scrum team look like in terms of roles? Who's on it? You mentioned business analysts. Who else from PO or developers? What's it look like?
Unfortunately, it's really hard to answer that because it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. Like, so for instance, I was at the Broad Institute, right, with the guys that map the human genome or some such stuff. And they built a COVID lab within a week for doing testing. Awesome. And interestingly, my son's school took advantage of it, which meant he could go back to school, which is like awesome. And my wife was suddenly incredibly happy. As my youngest son. So that team was very different to what other teams would be. So I think it's all, you've got the people necessary to deliver the value as necessary. And I have to say that most teams have to change a little bit as their understanding of what's valuable, as they understand the products that they're building, as that changes. And they either changes or you reskill a little bit to support that. So my experience though is generalists are awesome. You know, business analysts that do testing, testers that do some business analysis, coders, if we're in a software world, you got coders, UX that don't mind doing some UX, that understand DevOps. The generalists are the more agile teams. And then community, then some sort of service organization provides the deep skills necessary to help them be successful. And hopefully they teach them to fish so that they become more focused. I would pick a group of generalists over a group of specialists any day, and as long as they were motivated and cared about the outcomes and were willing to ask for help. But it's a tough question, Georgina. Thank you for that.
It is a tough question. It's a tricky one. We've got tons of really fantastic questions in here. And I'm sure that people are excited to keep learning from you. So I'm actually going to drop a link to an article that you wrote for Pragmatic that kind of will give people some more information. So I just dropped that in the chat. Everyone, you should go grab that. You'll enjoy that a ton. It's a total blast of an article. And then if you have questions that we didn't get around to answering, I hope that you enjoyed the kind of points that we did hit on, and we will work to get your questions answered offline. And I think that we are people are dropping off, so I think that we will.
We're at time. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Georgina, for hosting. Thanks everybody. Stay connected. This is fun, right? Let's change the world.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Dave, for being with us.